focus on higher education, and this is a story that we had raised a few weeks ago regarding the National Student Financial Aid Scheme and its ability or otherwise to keep to its commitments to pay all landlords who are renting out accommodation to students. And of course, you'll know that they had made a pledge with landlords not to evict the students whose accommodation fees had not been paid at that stage. We're also hearing from civil society. The organization Undoing Tax Abuse has been warning NSFAS since 2023, we're told, that they are sitting on a student accommodation time bomb, calling for the issue to be urgently addressed. Most recently, the Department of Higher Education and Training established a steering committee to assess accommodation challenges across all institutions of higher learning throughout the country. This assessment follows the fatal shooting of a student who was killed during a demonstration against the deplorable state of accommodation at the Walter Sisulu University's Mthatha campus, and that happened recently. The student Sisonke Mbolekwa was laid to rest in Matatiele in the Eastern Cape, and that funeral taking place yesterday. So let me welcome our guests for this afternoon. In studio, I'm joined by Kagiso Mamabolo, who is a landlord involved in this sector, and also online we have Asive Dlanjwa, who is the South African Union of Students spokesperson, as well as Rudy Heineke, a senior project manager of OUTA, the organization Undoing Tax Abuse. So that conversation is on now. Let me start with you, Kagiso, in the studio. Thanks for coming through, by the way. Your understanding of where things stand, and the reason I start with you is that a few weeks ago I had a conversation with Ishmael Mnisi, speaking on behalf of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, and their understanding was that all accommodation providers who are accredited, who are in the system, there was no backlog from payments from last year. All of those would have been paid. The difficulty being those who are providing accommodation without necessarily being within the system and being accredited, etc. From a landlord's perspective, what is the actual situation? What's going on?
Well, it's a pity I wasn't here when he was being interviewed. But look, we are an association that represents the private student housing landlords. And in total, we control over 80,000 students that are in our premises. And our accommodation meets the best standards. Even we go above the national norms and standards of government. And I don't think the representation by Mr. Munisi is factually correct, because at the beginning of the year, we issued a statement as the association that we are owed 44 million of 2024, which is the amount.
I remember that statement.
Yes, that amount related to the work that the administrator and his team could not finish. So he left office, and that money is still owed to us. We are currently in agreement with the new CEO that by the end of this month, that 44 million need to have been settled. Now, come to 2025, now we have a new bill that has brought forward, because February, March, April, and now May, we have not been paid. And let me say this, Munisi is correct to say that if you are accredited and then you meet the submission criteria in terms of the deadlines, you will be paid on time. There are members that have been paid on time. But we still have majority of the members that have not been paid on time. In fact, I can go further to say that majorities of the members who have been paid on time are those members who are paid by the universities, where NSFAS gives money to the universities pays the landlord. But where NSFAS has accredited accommodation providers and they are using their intermediaries, the solution partners, they call them, those members have not been paid.
I see. So they're intermediaries in some instances, and that introduces that level of complexity.
Yes, and that level of complexity of intermediaries, it's a NSFAS process. It has nothing to do with universities. So it means landlords get accredited there, they are given students by NSFAS, and then they are forced then to wait for NSFAS to pay. So in this instance, majority of those landlords have not received the accommodation.
Let me get a perspective. Yes. Let me bring you into the conversation. Asive Dlanjwa from the South African Union of Students. Again, the same question, just a basic question. What is your understanding from your vantage point representing students? What's going on here? Why do we keep talking about an accommodation crisis, accommodation payment, NSFAS funding crisis?
Good afternoon, Butula Sizwe, to you, to your guests and to your viewers and listeners. Look, the problem of accommodation is a complex one. There's not one problem. So first of all, the reality is that you've got an NSFAS system that in paper and in principle is something that we would agree with in terms of ensuring that we've got student accommodation that is accredited, that meets the minimum standards, that is conducive for students to live and learn in, but also that we've got student accommodation where that is affordable and accessible. That's the principle, but the extent to which NSFAS has been able to deploy the requisite capacity for its implementation and be able to garner consensus across the value chain of student accommodation, it has been deplorable. There has been grave and great incompetence that has been displayed. It is incapacitated. We've met with them several times for the last few years, and the one conclusion that we get to is that there's no capacity to be able to roll out the program in the system. And so obviously that has led to many challenges. It has made one of the biggest being that they've not been able to pay landlords in time, and which has obviously strained the relationship between the landlords and the students. So that's but one problem. Then you've got the issue of institutions. At face value, it would appear that institutions are more efficient, but obviously they've been doing it longer than NSFAS would have been doing the administration of student accommodation, but there's been a huge corruption in that. In fact, even before NSFAS used to accredit in the student accommodations, there were times where students would still be kicked out, but more than anything, that the conditions that the students had been living under were neglected. University officials, because many of them own those student accommodations, often turn a blind eye at a mass scale to the quality of student accommodation. For instance, the student that had been killed in Wusu was in a residence that is accredited by the institution. The students had been protesting against the deplorable conditions in those institutions. So the point I suppose I'm trying to make is that we've not been able to coordinate the system of student accommodation across the country and ensure that we do so across the sector, that different universities don't do different things, different colleges, that we've got a single coordinated system. We've not been able to reach that. And for us to be able to deploy the requisite capacity and competences to be able to run a student accommodation, which by the way is worth over 12 billion rand per year. It's huge, but there's no capacity, it seems, from the state to run it efficiently.
So let's build on the point that Asive is making there and bring in Rudy Heineke. Rudy, from OUTA's perspective, you're saying you've been warning since 2023 that this is the accommodation situation at higher education is a ticking time bomb. What has led you to that assessment that says we're sitting on a ticking time bomb?
Yes, I think, first of all, I want to say that I do agree with what Asiwe Erkagishu is saying, that there's no capacity, that there's no good management, and that intermediaries make it very, very difficult for this scheme to get streamlined. The other thing is the time bomb that we warned about, I think was exactly that. When we saw a few years ago when it was announced that everything wants to be handled and managed now by NSFAS, it became a problem. They do not have the capacity, they do not have the expertise, they are not accommodation management agents, and I think they are trying to do what they are not supposed to do. Their NSFAS, their mandate is to aid students financially who is in need thereof. Not to manage buildings, not to inspect buildings. They should be the payment officer. And I do believe that this whole accreditation and management of accommodation should lie with under the auspices of the department. And if they source some of it out to the institutions that can handle it, then so be it. But this is this debacle for 7 years now. They cannot sort it out. And I think that it is very sad that NSFAS up until today, or that student accommodation rather up until today, is not sorted out. And I do believe this is not NSFAS's mandate to manage this, and this should be handled by a group of people or a sector or a department that specifically is instituted to do this.
Yeah. Kagiso, let me bring you back into this. Is there a distinction between those accommodation providers that NSFAS either pays directly or through institutions or through intermediaries versus situations where the payment is done via a payment to the student who is then expected to pay the landlord, the service provider?
No, there's no distinction. I mean, I think the NSFAS accreditation process comes out in different grades. So at the end of the accreditation process, your property will be either graded A or at least D or E. Each grade has a rate linked to it.
Sure.
Right? So NSFAS has a backlog in accrediting and grading properties.
I see.
So we have members that have submitted their property last year. They have not received any feedback from NSFAS. The other problem to that, we have those that have been accredited by NSFAS, and NSFAS has now communicated to them to say, look, you need to move out the students and take them to another accredited provider.
On what basis?
On the basis that NSFAS believes that the accreditation which was given was not legitimate.
Erroneously given.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And this is part of the problem that we are raising with the NSFAS doing accreditation, that it opens room for manipulation. We're not saying universities don't do that, but we are saying if a landlord is given students by the university, you are guaranteed payment every month. In some instances, you get paid in advance. With a NSFAS situation, if you are paid today as a landlord this month, you are not guaranteed next month you're going to be paid. So we are in a situation where we chase for our payments month and month. And we don't think this problem, NSFAS will resolve it this year. We have put together a proposal to NSFAS to say you need to bring all the stakeholders, the students, the universities, the department, so that the solution that comes out of this, it's a long-term solution that is actually supported by the accommodation providers themselves. We believe that is an overreach, and we are actually, like Asive said and Rudy, we are actually putting too much burden on the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. Now it's focusing on student accommodation, and we are not paid on time. So we think we have to, as a sector, come up with a solution that we will put us as accommodation providers at the center of managing the student accommodation, together with an oversight from the Department of Higher Education.
Asive, let me bring you back in. Talk to me about, a few weeks ago, there was this talk about 13,800 Rand having been paid to students and 10,800 Rand thereof being for the payment of accommodation. And I saw reports that were saying NSFAS is urging students to ensure that they don't use the 10,800 Rand for their own purposes, but actually pass it on to the landlords to avoid problems. Just the desirability of that system, where in a way now you're having to trust students and trust this task on students. Is that working for you?
All right. Just before that, I think I must just clarify something. We're not of the view that NSFAS should not administer student administration or any allowances. The issue of capacity is not inherent to any organization. It is deliberately and intentionally built. What we're arguing is that let the capacity be built within NSFAS to handle this particular transaction, because the argument that it's overburdened and therefore it can't is a silly argument. No institution is born with inherent capacity to do anything. You build the capacity for purpose. So we're saying the capacity must be built. but it must be done within the state. We are saying that the state cannot be spending over 50 billion rand and then we throw it at the hands of often very of private that is often does not have the interest of the poor and the working class, and we're not able to administer that efficiently. So that's the principle. I think I must clarify that. On the issue of the desirability and the mechanisms that NSFAS has used in terms of transferring allowances to beneficiaries and all other stakeholders, it is what I raised, Butula, in the beginning, that there isn't a single coordinated system by which we are able to administer the fund in the most efficient and effective way possible. It is obviously probably not desirable that you would want to put, you can't have a contract with a landlord as NSFAS or as an institution. Then you take the money, you give it to a student, and yet your contract and the person whom you have accredited or the entity is the landlord, is the accommodation provider. Number one. Number two, the nature of poverty is that it creates a prevalence where one could be, feel or act in ways that would not necessarily be in the best interest of everyone, including but not limited to using monies that should not be used for food or for sending home, that should be for accommodation. Students would end up doing that because of their socio-economic conditions. So the reality, I suppose, is that it's probably not desirable and it should not have happened in the first place. What we had been advocating for was that the monies for food, toiletries, and other necessities, those monies must be paid directly to students. But in terms of accommodation, it just makes life easier for everyone, and you limit the value chain. In fact, you narrow the value chain also, whereby you can just have money coming directly from the funder to the people whom are providing the service. That would probably be the most efficient. But the point is what I've said in the beginning, that there's no single coordinated system in terms of administering the fund. It's like every day people wake up there in that institution and thumbs suck, how can we mess up the institution today? And they take all these ridiculous decisions, which in most cases have backfired, particularly as far as the interest of the poor has been compromised through those decisions.
Rudy, I'll give you a final word in just a moment, but I do need to take advantage of the fact that I have you in studio, Kagisho, to clarify at least two things, because I'm starting to get a better sense of the differentiated approaches to payment of landlords, and I wouldn't want to lose that. Tell me about this process you alluded to, the delay in verifying accommodation providers, because it seems to me that's also a key cog in this machinery. Tell me about whether or not there's been a situation where that delay has been coupled with accommodation providers either being asked to take on students either way, even pending the verification, or them deciding, or students deciding that while waiting for your verification, I'm happy to take up accommodation. Has that been a gap on its own?
Yes, so there are a couple of problems that leads to late payment. And I think from a NSFAS point of view, the verification and checking whether the students are in residence, checking whether the students are still on registered, it's something that has been happening at NSFAS for the last 10 years, as far as I remember. So the process of verification is not a new process that NSFAS has introduced because they are managing student accommodation directly. So the point I'm making to you, Tulas, is that the reasons that NSFAS are providing to accommodation providers for the delay in paying them are the reasons that NSFAS has always been providing in the last 10 years on why they are failing to pay students their fees on time. Right? So then the other problem here is that once students, once landlord get accredited by NSFAS, then the students goes on the portal and select for a check-in. And if they do select, the idea here is the students can check in, then NSFAS will have that information that their students are in this particular residence. And in that case, what we've discovered is that NSFAS then comes back to us and say, look, this student is not supposed to be in your residence.
I see.
Right? So there's a system mismatch in the background. And the reason what contribute this is that NSFAS is using 4 solution partners, which are different, but they are supposed to provide one service.
Sure.
Right? Then the other issue that we are dealing with at the moment is an issue where the solution partners of NSFAS had allowed landlords to allow students to stay in without NSFAS giving a green light.
So these are the intermediaries.
Intermediaries. So
Yeah.
we find our landlords now with the NSFAS students, they now have to get them out because NSFAS is refusing to recognize them, and intermediaries were part
We're
and
saying,
parcel
"Go
of
ahead."
that.
Yeah.
So these problems are many. Let's go back to the money that was paid into the student's account.
Yes, this is the 13,800
Yes.
rand, and I didn't really get clarity.
Yeah, and I can tell you
What's
Tila,
happening there?
That's the new issue, right? That is the first experience that NSFAS never had before. So, and I think it's a surprise. I think NSFAS is still battling to explain it to us what happened there. The NSFAS contract says no landlord should expect payment from the student. That's why we're not asked to ask for a supplementary payment. We're not asked to ask for students to pay for damages. Students are not supposed to pay the deposit because NSFAS said we will pay you.
Yeah.
So NSFAS violated its own lease agreement where it pays the student, and after paying the student, they say the student pay us. All our landlords have not received that money.
Sure. Wow.
Yes. So we said to NSFAS, where we are now, that you will have to pay us. We're not going to chase students and ask them to pay
Right.
us. The agreement and the lease is with NSFAS.
All right. Thank you. I do get a sense that I've gotten a better sense of where the story is and where it's likely to go, and better conversations around accountability for this issue. That is Kagisho Mamabulo, and we were joined by Asive Dlanjwa from the South African Union of Students, as well as Rudy Heinecker, who is Senior Project Manager at OUTA, also responsible for looking into investigations into NSFAS.